Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Fake Accents Unite. I am joined, as always, by the eternal presence of the omnipresent, I won't say omniscient, but possibly omnipotent Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. I mean, I find it wonderful how you kind of refer to me as the eternal being these days. This, as you no doubt caught on Twitter, is due to prolonged staring at ladies' breasts.
Yes, the secret of your immortality. It is not a Lazarus pit. It is not some kind of convoluted wonder drug. It is simply that you spend hours a day lewding at women.
It's just bosoms that does it, yes. If anybody's wondering, I don't know who it was. Someone posted an old article, the headline of an old article. I think it was from 2017, was it, or 18? That apparently, isn't it male lifespan is extended by looking at women's breasts or something like that? And I just reposted that just in capital letters science. So yes, it's basically if people want to know the secret to eternal life, yes. Boobies.
Oh, clearly. It couldn't possibly be a reporter's very, very poor interpretation of a piece of scientific literature.
Oh, what was it? This reminds me. What was it Boris Johnson once jokingly said, which of course immediately the feminists seized upon. When he was running for mayor of London or whatever, didn't he say something like, vote for me and your wife's breasts will grow by one size or something like that. I'm sure someone in the chat can look this up for us.
Don't remember that one. Good grief.
Oh yes. Boris can be very entertaining when he really wants to be. I'm quite sure he said something about your wife's boobs will grow larger. I don't remember the exact wording, but it definitely was once said in a mayoral race in London, and the person saying it was one Boris Johnson.
Amazing.
There's a reason why I have a certain sympathy for a lad. What can I say?
It's quite funny when you look at some of these things, because, of course, there was an article which came out some years ago where it talked about how people who have more sex are more successful. So the idea is that the more you get laid, the more successful you'll be. That's how this article phrased it.
Alternatively, of course, it could be the other way around.
Of course, the other way around.
The more successful you are.
And so when it comes to your breastantine experience, shall we say, on Twitter, I think is it the case that looking at breasts extends the lifespan, or if you have a longer lifespan, you're more likely to have looked at more breasts or spent more time looking at them? Who knows?
Who knows? Yes, but these things.
I tell you what, though,
these things do. Yeah, what was it?
It warrants.
I'm just looking at it here. I'm just looked it up on Google. And I haven't gone into the thing yet, but it says here: voting Tory will cause your wife to have bigger breasts and increase your chances of owning a BMW M3. That's Boris Johnson. So there you go.
Al Johnson. The only the best topics on Fake Accents Unite, ladies and gentlemen. Good grief! We do appear to be being flooded with money from people. Let's see what we've got here. Just before we get into anything too serious, or whether or not we do that entirely.
We can't go serious after this opener.
Indeed. Sitsgoen says, "Let's all tarry eternally." Well, I'll have you know, Sitsgoen, we were early this week by less than a minute, but we were still early, so that's always good.
And when we're early, that just resets everything to zero, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
That's the rule. Yes.
Just a single early outing. Not that we've ever been late in historically either.
Well, I mean, it's the problem with his timekeeping, isn't it?
Must be. There's no other way that it could be possible, because of course, as we know, if we're early, this resets the entire timeline so that we've never been late at all. So, just so you know. Mr. Gently Benevolent says, Nescafe Gold from my Uwuisha mug. Is there a better way to start one's day? Morning, folks. You can just hear.
It's not for me really to wish anybody a long, lingering, painful death, but sometimes I come close.
I don't want to know where you come, Britisher, but the the idea of drinking coffee, the degenerate drink, according to the Britisher, from a degenerate mug, the Uwuisha mug, degenerate according to Britisher, surely makes sense. No, you got a proper Britisher mug for tea, and then
this is the ultimate argument.
Go on,
and that is, who drinks more coffee, the British or the French?
The French.
So, do you want to be more French?
Hardly.
Or more British?
Although, if you compare, interestingly, American coffee, because, of course, that's where it supposedly is, the Americans, I love my coffee.
Yeah, but I mean, their understanding of history is somewhat zero.
Well, their understanding of coffee is somewhat zero, as I am led to believe from friends who have lived in... The
British, more than likely, had a great number of coffee houses before the Americans even heard of the drink.
Yeah, but my point is that Americans still don't have coffee houses. The Americans, despite them claiming that a black coffee is an Americano somehow, are much more likely to have incredibly milky beverages, which are about 80% milk and tiny amount of it being coffee itself. So I'm reliably informed, of course, by friends who lived in New York.
Starbucks is not the ultimate in coffee experience.
It might be for the American, but the Americans, of course, will not be drinking Americanos. That would be.
So where would your ultimate coffee experience lie? I mean, if you had the choice to go anywhere on earth to get the greatest coffee, where would you go?
I would love to have a Vietnamese coffee in Halong Bay.
So you would go to Vietnam, or would that just be that the surroundings would be appealing to you, or would it be that you would feel that is sort of the ultimate coffee culture?
No, it's not that it's the ultimate coffee culture, but my favourite coffee is a Vietnamese coffee. And therefore, having a Vietnamese coffee in Vietnam would surely be somewhat resonant.
Because I suspect it's more than likely the Italians that own that. I mean, the very fact that the Americans would dub something an Americano suggests to me that they somewhere secretly know that it's actually the Italians. I mean, I heard this somewhere, I don't remember where, but apparently a lot of those little coffee shops in Italy,
yes,
you pay more for your coffee if you have it sitting down.
Yes, this is all of Italy.
So you can go in and you basically, there's like a little bar.
Yes.
And you can just be served an espresso.
Yes.
And have it standing up and then leave the cup there and just walk out. And that will be cheaper than if you have the same beverage, but you sit down to drink it. So it seems as if they kind of, they need their sort of quick fix. So they walk in.
No.
Have a coffee for 30 seconds and then off they go again.
No. Do you want me to explain how this
go ahead,
works?
Explain.
So, as someone who, I spent a month.
I can proudly boast that I have no idea about this because, frankly, I don't drink coffee.
I spent a good month walking down the west coast of Italy a few years back. And this is just a very common practice because you know how we will have a service charge which is kind of sporadically enforced. It's usually lumped in with the costs on the menu, but some restaurants will have a service charge which is like a mandatory tip, right? In this country. Well, Italy has that, but they will add all these little surcharges for all sorts of little things. If you want to use the bathroom, there will be a surcharge added in certain places. If you wish to have your meal or your coffee or whatever it is sitting down, there is a service charge for them bringing it to you. That's one thing. But they will also add on a table setting charge. which is usually
you'll have to pay the interest on the mortgage for the table. Yes.
Effectively, they say, well, because we put down, like a serviette and some forks and glasses, etc. Well, there's a charge for that, which is usually in the region of between, for the entirety of your meal, presumably, but I'm sure it'd be less for a singular coffee. It's somewhere in the region of €2, and that's just what you expect. And it infuriated me and a friend because we had budgeted based on the advertised prices of a lot of places, but Italy is rife with all of these what are effectively tourist traps as well, because there are city taxes for tourists. Any service that you
the most straightforward in announcing their prices.
Yeah.
I am astonished.
Well, it's like Americans not adding VAT to the prices on the shelf and it always being more expensive. Why would you do this? In no way is this a helpful thing to have. But there we go. So yes, Italy, be warned if you go there, make sure you budget at least 20% more than you're expecting because surcharges exist.
Well, there you go. We have learned something, children.
And yes, so it made my stay in Rome quite painful. I was there for 9 days and I wanted to be there for 4, and it was all to do with the way I was going to get flights to Bosnia, and it was just grief and absolute pain. I quite like the love them or hate them, I quite like the Scandinavian model actually on the way that they tax for disposable items. You know about this?
No.
So if you buy a bottle of water, the bottle of water costs, let's say, put it in English money, let's say the bottle of water costs £1. It will cost you £1 and 5 pence. And that 5 pence added is effectively a recycling deposit. And when you then deposit your bottle in a bin or a bottle bank, that is money comes back to you. So obviously what you do is you save up, and if you drink a lot of bottled water or canned goods, etc.
There was a lot more of that in the past.
Yes.
Because in the past they put a lot more stuff in actual glass bottles. It's when the plastic bottles came in, and obviously they're so much more convenient because they're lighter. That's when the whole deposit thing went out the window, because without there being that much of an onset of environmentalism, and with them also costing a fraction of the glass bottles, it was just no longer seen as worth doing.
Well,
prior to that, there was quite a little industry for deposits on bottles.
So in a similar way, so if you're homeless there, it's quite often that you become a litter picker because you can actually earn money. It's taken an edge off the begging, because people just go around and collect, and they're quite keen to take your rubbish off you and do it because they know they'll get some money out of it, which I think is quite a wholesome way to deal with the whole issue, if I'm honest.
Reminds me of that film The Terminal with Tom Hanks, where he ends up being the guy who's stranded in the airport terminal.
Okay.
He can't get home and he can't leave the terminal, so he's stuck in it.
Okay.
And he realizes that a lot of people will use, those trolleys to put your luggage on.
Yes.
And they won't bother getting the coin back out, so they'll just leave it wherever it's convenient to them and get in a taxi or something. And he realizes he can make enough money to actually buy a hamburger or so at the Burger King by collecting these trolleys.
Ah, I see. Yes. Very, very good. We used to have a thing fairly similar to that with when I worked in retail. You would always want to be put on the trolleys because people would just abandon trolleys in places and there'd be £1 in it. And of course this added up because of course your base rate was minimum wage, but you worked out that if you, over the course of your 6-hour shift, managed to pick up £5, that this was almost an extra £1 an hour, which was considerable. So there we go.
Well, the beauty of that Tom Hanks film is that it's actually based on a true story. Now, of course, some of the details will be added, so who knows whether the trolleys is true. But I believe it was in Paris airport there was a chap who got stuck.
Oh.
Yeah, and it was kind of one of those, one of those sort of bureaucratic nightmares where your papers aren't good for you to get out of the airport, but your papers are also not deemed good enough for you to go back home again. So you end up stuck in the middle of nowhere, having to wait for the various authorities to sort it out. And meanwhile, you may end up living there for months, if not years.
I see. Very strange.
Yeah, it's a Spielberg film with Tom Hanks, but it's based on, obviously it's based in America.
Hold the thought of film. So Scowen says, with regards to the whole recycling bottles thing, that we call it panter or pansamler, or pansamleri. I don't know how to pronounce Danish, and you can actually live off recycling these bottles and so on, apparently, and it's 20 pence a bottle, apparently, according to Jolly Rapscallion.
Oh, well, there you go. I notice how Scowen hasn't commented on our reset to zero.
He has commented later on, but I've not.
We haven't reached that.
We haven't reached that super chat yet, and I will save it so you can sit in anticipation of where we're going with that one. But back to films. I've not managed to source myself a decent copy of Zulu yet. But that's on my list of things to do. I did try and watch The Shining this week.
Okay.
Which has just led me to the conclusion that I cannot stand Stanley Kubrick's films. I'm
not that impressed with The Shining either.
I enjoyed A Clockwork Orange. 2001: A Space Odyssey is a spectacle, but in terms of an actual narrative, I appreciate that it's supposed to be conceptual and mind-bendy and whatnot, but I find it to be more presumptuous than actually intelligent.
Agreed.
And then The Shining, which I found... I understand that Jack Nicholson's character is not supposed to be particularly likeable, but even so, I find that the cinematography is poor. I get that it's Kubrick style and some may like it, but I certainly wouldn't rank it. It comes off to me as like an A-level student's project.
Well, yes, I'm sort of with you that I wasn't overly impressed when I watched it. I found that there are very long sequences that drag on forever and ever, a bit in the same way that Odyssey 2001 was. And you just feel, can we get past the artsy stuff now and get back to some sort of narrative? So yes, I too found myself drifting off at times, getting somewhat bored.
I don't have any initial problem with it. I just find him laborious. I think he's lazy, which is weird given his reported perfectionism on set with getting the scenes exactly right, but I think that his actual filmmaking style is quite lazy.
I think it's when one gets into the vision thing with some directors that it can get a bit like that.
So
didn't Kubrick do that one set in the First World War with Kirk Douglas as the officer?
Oh, good grief.
And that's a much more conventional film. And I believe he was also on Spartacus, wasn't he? Until he fell out with Kirk Douglas.
And this is not... Yeah, I haven't seen that one. I know he did... Did he do Full Metal Jacket? Is that the one he did? Which I have yet to watch as well, but that's on my list. I like how there seems to be a real division in the chat over this. It's just people going, oof, and other people who are feeling like they're on side. Clockwork, I will point, there are other Kubrick films which I have enjoyed. I quite enjoyed A Clockwork Orange. I think that film benefited quite a lot from having a narrator, but I haven't had my experiences with Stanley Kubrick have been less than well received, and he just comes off to me as a very minimalistic but not particularly well done thing. Overrated, in my opinion, anyway. So there we go. You're thinking of either The Heroes of Telemark, is that it? Is that the one you're thinking of?
No, that's set in Norway.
Or Paths of Glory, Or
That's the one.
Okay, there you go. So that
Yeah, it's basically it all surrounds a failed attack by the French army in the First World War, and then it kind of comes. The French army leadership is looking for scapegoats, so various people are supposed to be court-martialed, and Kirk Douglas is the officer who basically defends them and says you can't just basically make these people scapegoats and blame them for an attack that never stood a chance in the first place. And it's kind of a way of kind of displaying the complete pointlessness of a lot of the First World War. And yeah, in that regard, it has quite a bit of power. But it's a very conventional film. It's, as I say, you don't have endless sequences of cameras meandering about. It's not as experimental, and it's fine when things are experimental and you pull it off. But sometimes things are just experimental for their own sake, and they don't necessarily work that well. But you've got them in the film anyway, and that's when you feel, why are we watching this?
When you're in a certain frame of mind, yes, and I think it works as well. But I think you'd very much have to be in that kind of frame of mind. And then, I'd probably liken the style of it to something, a lot of people are going to hate me for this. There's a film called Extinction on Netflix, which is Natalie Portman.
Yeah.
And I think Annihilation, that's the one I'm thinking of, Annihilation. And that is also a very spectacular looking conceptual film, and it's very, very slow and drawn out, and there is the occasional high point of violence or action or whatever. And I enjoyed that in its own way in itself, but I had to be in the right frame of mind for it, and perhaps it's simply the case that I've tried watching The Shining in the wrong frame of mind for watching The Shining. But I've tried it several times. I watched all the way through 2001 expecting...
I can just sort of see you sitting in front of a mirror with a pocket watch, sort of using it as a pendulum, asking yourself to look into your own eyes in order to try and put yourself in the right mood to watch The Shining.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes you do have to be in the right mood for things. Like, if I want to watch a horror film, then I have to be in a particular mood to watch a horror film, and it could be that I just need to be in a particular.
I know what you mean, but nonetheless, I think you are supposed to somehow be able to lose yourself in a film.
Yes.
And I think very often the filmmaker, well, very often is the wrong way, but sometimes the filmmaker trying to be a bit too clever by half. Oh, look what I'm doing here. You just think, well, yes, but now we're looking at the film craft rather than actually losing ourselves in the story and the experience of this thing.
And that's not to say that
it can be a problem.
It's also, I think he's also quite obsessed with spectacle, in the same way. So, what I'm basically saying is clearly that Stanley Kubrick is the Michael Bay of his time. And then we'll leave it at that. Alright, let's pop back to Super Chats. So it's going. Here we go, the savoured moment here. Says, I am stunned, finding myself without words and completely flabbergasted. You have actually managed to start 10 seconds early. Early! Do this every time, and you're at 0 in less than 2,200 years. Do you have any idea what he's talking about, Bridget?
There you go, Scowen. I'm afraid, you didn't read the small print of the rules, and that is basically once you have confirmed that it's early, which it clearly was, then everything gets reset to 0. So, bad luck, I'm afraid.
Oh, good grief, everything is lit up. 1 second. There we go. Anna Quinn Cringewalker says, male longevity isn't the only thing it extends.
I have absolutely no idea what this person is talking about.
It couldn't possibly... What he's referring to. No, it couldn't possibly be anything. Neil Morgan says, good evening from Missouri. Welcome to the show, Neil Morgan, and welcome from across the pond.
What God-forsaken part of America that is.
Missouri? I don't know if it's East Coast or West Coast. Missouri.
Well, it's somewhere. It sounds like a French way of saying misery, doesn't it?
Misery. It's dead in the middle. It's right in the middle, midwestern region of the U.S. apparently.
Well, no doubt they felt miserable naming the state. Yeah, being stuck in the middle of it.
Well, it is about the same size as Ireland population-wise, so there is that. He says, I'm a big fan of YOL, AA, and Scrump. Nice to have a fan in the house. What is the best way to push back against the media? Is AA right about dissociation, or should we be more confrontational?
Staff, I have no idea what dissociation in this particular case is supposed to mean. I haven't heard AA's theories on the matter. But the first rule of doing anything is not to say YOL.
When was the last time you actually engaged with anything that AA had put out? I'm curious.
I honestly don't remember. This is not because it's that long ago. It's just because I cannot put a specific date on anything.
Okay, so it's got a couple of questions in there. What is the best way to push back against the media? The first is to, in my opinion, is to remain cool-headed. Recognise three indelible truths about the media. The first is they will sensationalise everything. The second is that they are fighting their own part in the culture war. And the third thing, if I can remember it off the top of my head, is that clearer heads will prevail. That's basically it. So remain cool and rational about the media. The best thing that you can do to fight back against it is to muster the facts on your side and to associate yourself with people who are willing to listen. This doesn't
keep stating truth.
It doesn't just mean you got to associate yourself with people who are media skeptical. I think it's more about the media slips up all the time, and they're also incompetent. So especially when it comes to things like science. So it's more about finding the flaws in what the media is saying, and then being able to articulate it in a cogent way, in a concise way, in a way that makes sense in lay terms. And if you can't do that for yourself, you can also do that by finding someone who can articulate that. That's why commentators really exist, I think, is people taking things that others have said and conceptualizing them in a way which makes it easy to understand. I mean, that's the educator's role in many ways as well. So, not that I see us necessarily all as educators, and we're not perfect, so don't take anything at face value, but I think that's important to do.
I think one of the first things is to kind of try and get an idea of the geography of the media, as in who is where, who has leanings politically in which regard. So if you are reading the Daily Mail and you're absolutely convinced that you're just getting the abject truth, then you're more than likely going to find yourself surprised one day. But at the same time, if you read The Guardian and you just take every word as handed down by God, again, you're going to get lost somewhere. So in the end, it's just, it does rely on you. You have to be able to rely on yourself to basically try and pick things apart, to read through the bias you're getting. I mean, put it like this: once upon a time, the Daily Mail actually didn't have an all too good a reputation.
It still doesn't.
Funnily enough, the world has got that crazy by now that they are actually now almost one of the more normal newspapers. But it's strange. You just basically, as I say, first have to work out where are all these newspapers situated? Where are all the broadcasters situated? Where would you... Nobody is sort of right slap on the line and gets it right every time. So it's a matter of just understanding the biases of the people who are actually telling you the stories. No, go ahead.
No, I'm going to bump on to another point if you.
Yep.
Yeah, which is so if you have to realise a couple of things as well, which is things like the media controls the narrative at the moment. Even the commentators in the alternative media space are latching on and talking about certain things. If, for instance, if we take the recent case of the tragic death of Sarah Everard, and the chap who's accused of, in fact, the chap and the woman who are accused of potentially murdering him, her even. The idea of a curfew for men and this whole idea of a kind of a greater discussion about the impact of male violence on society and how women are suffering under the heel, and there's an epidemic of violence behind an epidemic of violence against women in the country, when the facts which bear this out show this to be patently false in every single way. There is not an epidemic of violence against women. There is not an epidemic of violence against the citizenry by the police as yet. This is different to harassment, of course, although again that's harder to prove. This is different to rape, which again is harder to prove, and are two different issues. But in terms of actual male violence, in particular just stranger violence, so it works out that roughly 3 women a week are murdered to 8 men, and of these 3 women, 2 are murdered by an intimate partner and 1 is random violence, on average per week, which for a population of between 70 and 80 million is really not bad. It works out to be, if you're sex neutral, 1 in 85,500 chance of being murdered in any given year, presumably. And then, but of course these things, well, not in any given year actually, just over time. 1 in 85,500 for any generation. And then similarly, for women it is actually 1 in 166,000, which is rarer than being struck by lightning over the course of your lifetime. And then for men it's 1 in 58,000 or so. So in every conceivable metric these things are wrong, and yet the media is running with it. These fringe people on Twitter have been amplified to an enormous amount because the media latches on to everything Twitter says, which is again its own ideological echo chamber, to the point where even the Welsh First Minister is talking about, maybe we should lock men away after 6 p.m.
It's these non-governmental organisations. It's these various organisations that are out there were just nothing else but campaign groups. Because if it were just something happening on Twitter, I mean, the media wouldn't know where to look. But because there are recognised groups who, in this case, the great mistake in representation is that we're basically told that these people speak for women. And you just go, well, no, they speak for certain feminist activist groups. That they don't represent women at all.
Do you know what women, the women who aren't activists, have told me with regards to this issue? Because I was curious to get their opinion. I don't want to live in my own head too much with it, even though I know these things are patently false. But I wanted to understand where people were coming from. And so I spoke to several of my female colleagues and friends, and the general response that I got back is that they feel scared a lot of the time, especially if they're alone, and especially if they're walking past groups of youths, especially young men, right? And I'm going, first off, anyone who is of sound mind feels a little bit intimidated when they walk past a bunch of hoodies on a corner who are lounging about and not doing anything, and just basically looking for trouble in some cases, and in other cases just hanging around. And secondly, a lot of this fear is flatly unwarranted. But there's also a potential in it that it may be a protective factor for them because they move on hurriedly, etc., etc. They're tense, even though nothing has happened. And this may, in part, explain why, or partly why, because it's never univariate, partly why men are killed at such a higher rate. It's because the women take the precautions which are keeping them actually safe. The argument is made, of course, that if you say of a woman, it's such a shame why we should keep women or women should be asked to take precautions like not going out in a dodgy area at night alone, is looked at as a kind of victim blaming thing, as if you have more control over the behaviour of societal dissidents and murderers than you do of your own citizenry, your personal safety being your own responsibility. And of course, the analogy I drew to in the video I did on the topic was of a car crash. Did you watch the video, Britisher? I won't begrudge you if you haven't.
I didn't. No.
Okay, so the analogy I gave was a car crash. So let's say a woman is driving along in a car, just as an example, and a man drives into her from the side. So it's not her fault. This is completely his fault. He's driven into her, but she wasn't wearing her seatbelt. As a result, she's thrown clear and dies. She hits a tree or something. In the aftermath of such an event, we can recognise that the man did wrong, whilst also recognising that the woman would have been safer if she had been wearing a seatbelt. And
she contributed to her own trouble. Yes.
She contributed to her own trouble. We do not get activists campaigning for the removal of seatbelts because because in a perfect, equal, rational, sane society, there would be no car crashes, and therefore there would be no need for such a precaution as a seatbelt. So, the fact that this equivalency has drawn much more of a, shall we say, a serious response from our government is something ludicrous. To get back to the chap's point, though, Neil Morgan, in terms of pushing back against the media, the answer is not dissociation or confrontation. The answer is whichever you feel more comfortable with. If you disassociate, then you need to focus on building something which is going to be resistant and resilient to these sorts of things. The things that I can think of, a young lady, I won't call her a lady, a young girl accused me, she has a borderline personality disorder, and accused me of an indecent assault, basically, in the presence of another friend who was too drunk that night and couldn't remember and felt very uncomfortable with the whole situation. And by the end of everything going through and the inconsistencies in her story and everything, of course, even her friends had rallied behind me and had submitted their own estimation. And this being in an institutional context, so again, not a court of law, so no burden of proof necessary, instead a balance of probabilities. It was that which saved me rather than anything else, the testimony of her friends. So it's a very strange position to be in, but if you're not going to be confrontational with the media and you're going to disassociate, you need to be building towards something. You can't just disassociate and get on with your life. If you're getting on with your life, you need to be able to build something. If you want to be confrontational with the media and call out their BS, as it were, then you can do that. That's absolutely one way to deal with it, but you've got to do it in such a way that you are personally, you are turning people to the side, that you are convincing the normies, despite the fact that AA doesn't really believe that normies exist. You need to be convincing, effectively, mum and dad. My parents are complete normies. They need to be convinced that there is a problem with the media. They need to be convinced that there's a problem with this particular narrative. They need to be shown the alternative view. They need to at least be questioning what's going on. And in your job, if you're going to be confrontational, is to induce a questioning nature in other people, because you won't have all of the answers, but you need to make people aware that the media certainly does not have all of the answers. One of my favourite quotes, actually, recently as well, given that the media tends to rely heavily on experts, is that science is recognising that the experts don't know nearly as much as you think. So there's that one. I hope that has been somewhat of an answer for you.
There's also, it's always worth asking yourself, a bit like when you see something on Twitter or whatever, and you see film clip, it's always worth asking yourself, who's holding the camera? Basically, how come there is a camera filming that? Because that's how very often you realize that something is faked. In just the same way, it's also always worth asking yourself, when the media is telling you something, whence do they know this?
Yes. Investigative journalism is dead. And the sooner people start to recognise that, the better, I suppose. Or it's not dead, but it's certainly not in legacy media.
Just to put it like this, I don't think there is a way to sort of fight back against the media. I don't see us defeating the BBC anytime soon.
It's also it's also important to be specific, isn't it, Brisher, about what we mean by the media, because of course the media as an entity is never going away. It will just it's like one of Lovecraft's great old ones. It's just a shapeless, formless void of different entities. You can influence it and change it, and it will change over time as well. That's the hope, is that it becomes better as well, because we will always have a news service of some description. Right.
Well, I mean, the question I think we as a society have to ask ourselves is, how do we... Because as I say, I don't believe that you can ever go backwards in history, but how can you get from the position we are in now to a position whereby the media represents something a little bit more akin to what we had in the past? And that's not easy to do, because you always have to evolve from the position which you presently occupy. But yes, it is getting more and more insane. I mean, just with this whole, women and Clapham Common and whatever, just these last 1 or 2 days, the BBC has once in a while been putting something out on Twitter, which is sort of a clip of, I think, 2 young sisters.
Okay.
And it's clear, it's absolutely clear that these are feminist activists, and it's pretty much an activist piece. And yet it's being put out by the BBC. And you do kind of have to ask yourself, how the hell did we screw up and that badly as a society that this is where we've ended up in?
The whole point
with GB. Go ahead.
The whole point of the BBC being free from advertising constraints, whilst also being free from the administration of government, shall we say. This is the whole reason it has separate funding and the TV license exists in the first place, is to ensure that it's supposed to ensure that it is not influenced by advertisers or big tech or big anything, and it's certainly not influenced by government. And yet what has happened? It's been completely co-opted and taken over by ideological interests nonetheless, despite
how it just panders to certain factions. Yeah.
Yes, and it's infuriating, because it should be so much better, and yet it has been co-opted.
And I mean, I don't know how it is with you. You obviously being a lot younger than me, but I remember the days when the BBC was decent. I mean, there was never a time when the BBC was not accused of bias and whatever. So particularly the right has always had a habit of accusing the BBC of bias. And I think one of the problems that the right now has is that it cried wolf too often, because if you go back 30 years or so, they were already crying bias, and back then they were actually pretty fair. And therefore now, to a lot of other people, when they hear people on the right now crying, oh, they're terribly biased, this is terribly unfair, a lot of people will think, well, I've heard this before, except of course now it's true.
Well, it's funny as well, isn't it? Because it seems so clear from our position, respectively, that the legacy media and the BBC in particular has a particular bias. And yet, you will still see from the other side of the aisle people calling it the Brexit Broadcasting Corporation, which to me
that is entirely tactics. They know exactly what they're doing.
Entirely ludicrous.
They know themselves that it's a lie, but they deliberately provide the lie in order to give the BBC the possibility to the ability to say, oh well, see, we're being accused from both sides, so therefore we must be somewhere in the middle. And that is completely disingenuous. It's, I mean, I can honestly, as the famous fence sitter, I really think I'm in a position to say, no, that is utterly disingenuous from the BBC. They know full well that those attacks from the left, accusing them of right-wing bias, are completely farcical.
Indeed. I find, although actually I don't think it's true. I think until every last right-winger has been expunged from the BBC, the left-wingers there will see their holy crusade as incomplete.
Well, I mean, with Andrew Neil having left, it's pretty much happening, isn't it?
Well, yes, but in some ways, if you can call Andrew Neil right-wing, I mean, really, the.
Well, no, I think it's fair to say Andrew Neil is right-wing.
He is.
Or he was sharing a flat with, I think, one or two folks that went on to become Tory ministers. He's been the chief editor of the Sunday Times.
Yes.
He's been a Rupert Murdoch man all his professional life. He's now starting GB News for Rupert Murdoch.
I was being a bit facetious.
Say he's a right-winger.
I was being a bit facetious, yes. The funniest thing, actually, given that Piers Morgan has walked out of GMB, entirely staged walkout as well, which was kind of infuriating.
How do you mean a staged walkout?
Yeah, he was. Did you say? How do I mean?
Yeah, in what way was it a staged walkout? I mean, I saw him walking out. It didn't, it didn't strike me as something that was put on.
He basically had been drafting his resignation some weeks before. Is basically the way. I wish I had the sources for you now, British, because I can't remember exactly what it is. But there have been a lot of. Aside from the rumour mill, which is obviously always going to churn.
Well, yeah, but I mean, even if he was thinking of leaving, I still don't think that this would have been the way in which he intended to go. I think,
well, without
if you are getting sick and tired of a certain job or whatever, I still think something like this would have the capacity to push you over the edge. Well, and I think that's very much what we're looking at here. I mean, I don't think that this was a pre-planned thing.
Well, without getting unfettered access to his mind at the time of the walkout, I suppose we shall never know. But
I think once you start getting berated by a camp weatherman for being a terrible person, maybe that is the moment when you say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not listening to this rubbish. Thank you very much, goodbye. And it may be that you had already some plans to, leave the job, or you were having thoughts about it, or whatever. But no doubt, I think it was more than likely a genuine, oh, come on, I won't listen to this. Thank you very much.
Britisher. He's Piers Morgan. He is going to try and make a spectacle out of leaving. However he leaves, they would never go quietly, and as a result, of course, of it making some headlines, he's now being courted to the tune of a salary of over £10 million a year by both American and British interests.
Well, I mean, he's already on a multi-million-pound contract for a column with the Daily Mail, isn't he?
Probably, certainly, would not surprise me. But the I did have something else to say which was not Piers Morgan related, but it was supposed to be just tangential.
Yes, he's got into your brain now.
It was just supposed to be tangential and into something else.
I've always thought of the man as rather odious.
Oh, he is.
But I did feel, well, yes, for once. I mean, I say for once. I think once in a while, Piers Morgan. The reason he is where he is because he does seem to know how to read the public mood once in a while. And I think in this particular case, he was just dead on. He
reminds me of someone attempting to be Simon Cowell and failing. It's basically the way I look at it.
Sure, because I don't think that's really his territory. I think he's more in the area of an Andrew Neil, when you look at his actual career. Whereas Simon Cowell is a big media entity, but that is because he was in the music industry.
I suppose
and
it's
kind of wedded it with television.
I suppose it's more because, of course, I was first introduced to Piers Morgan as a judge on Britain's Got
yes,
Talent
yeah.
as opposed to anything else.
But I mean, you could see them having someone like Andrew Neil as a judge, couldn't you?
Yes.
And that's what I mean. That's I think he wasn't it the Mirror. I think he was the chief editor of the Mirror. I think he went on to the Sun after that. I'm not sure. So he was a chief editor of one of the newspapers. So too was Andrew Neil. So that's why I'm comparing these two. That they're coming from sort of fairly similar backgrounds when it comes to looking after newspapers. Even though Andrew Neil would be clearly more right-leaning, more conservative, whereas Piers Morgan, I mean, the Mirror is rather a left-leaning newspaper, and I think he would be more sort of. I think he wouldn't begrudge my saying that. He's more than likely a bit more populist.
I don't know. I like Piers Morgan is not that I think Andrew Neil is a particularly shrewd man. But Piers Morgan strikes me as like if you're going to tier up the list, it goes sort of any kind of non-committal presenter. Then Piers Morgan is like the low tier viewer, and then Andrew Neil is a little bit higher tier, and then upwards from that you get, without sounding too brash or anything, it's people who do their own research and listen to multiple sources, right? They don't just commit to a kind of cult of personality in the same way. But
I'm reminded of Moira Stewart here, because the BBC famously got rid of her, which was rather funny because she was a black woman. And they said, oh, well, it's because she's a news presenter, whereas we want trained journalists. And I think the public at the time was kind of thinking, well, why are they getting rid of her? She's very good at what she does. And it's not as if the others don't read out the stories that others have researched. So I think there's a difference between, the chap who's reporting in the rain outside, I don't know, Downing Street 10, and the chap who's the news anchor in the studio. And these days, they're not news anchors as such, but when it comes to people like Piers Morgan and Andrew Neil, I think that's much more the way you would have to understand them. You don't really expect them to be mucking around on a farm because there's been some outbreak of foot and mouth.
Speaking of farms, Jeremy Clarkson's been working on one. The arch nemesis of Piers Morgan, Jeremy Clarkson.
I didn't know he was his nemesis.
He really is. They really hate each other, and and Clarkson has been working on a farm. There was a petition, I believe, to get Piers' position on Good Morning Britain replaced by Jeremy Clarkson, just so that it would spite Piers, which was quite a funny idea. But I can't see Clarkson getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get the early stuff done. But Clarkson actually has surprised me recently, because let's compare Clarkson, say, to James May, right? Because they obviously worked together for years and so on. And James May is very much of the kind of, he's a socialist himself. He's got an activist bent in some ways. He's advocated on behalf of green policies, etc. And yet he has owned more supercars than any of the trio. And continues to own them over time. Now, I've got nothing against James May for owning as many supercars, but it's interesting to see the hypocrisy there. Whereas Clarkson, who is the arch petrol head, has had his cars in the beginning, and then realised that actually he wasn't one for all of that kind of flash in private life, and now has his Land Cruiser, I think. Is the vehicle he has at the moment. I was
just about to ask, does he now drive some rather large SUV? Because just looking at Clarkson, I just wonder how many supercars he really fits into.
No, the ones that he's interested in. Because, of course, he has a farm, which has, interestingly, been one of the focuses of an Amazon series he is producing, is that he's working on his farm, and that's the show. So it's
I just meant because Clarkson strikes me as rather a large man. Whereas a lot of those supercars, I think, are rather, how shall we say, tight. And I think the older you get, the harder it is to fit into them and also to get out of them again.
There is that, but that doesn't mean that he hasn't enjoyed the toys, as it were, over time. But my point is that
I mean, undoubtedly, yes, we've all seen him in a car going power.
Yes, but it's funny that in the end that he has a much smaller carbon footprint than the carbon warrior James May. This amuses me.
But it's questionable to what extent a sort of a top SUV might have a smaller carbon footprint.
The SUVs are much more environmentally friendly than you might believe at this point. But yes,
I'm not sure. I think it depends what model you have, and something tells me that Clarkson won't have the sort of lower to middle range model.
Well, no. Why would you expect that? So, I imagine it's not going to be all basics.
Yes, I just mean driving around in a Range Rover with 500 horsepower is maybe not that much smaller carbon footprint.
Well, I would disagree because he only has the one vehicle, but that's just me. All right. Anyway, so. Why did I go on to Clarkson?
I have no idea. We came from Piers Morgan to Clarkson.
Piers Morgan to Clarkson. Oh, because they wanted Clarkson to replace him on Good Morning Britain briefly. And there you go.
Yes, that would have been interesting. Getting Clarkson confronted with some irate black feminist at 9 o'clock in the morning. I can well imagine that would last about 10 minutes and he would be fired.
And there are two things which come to mind. One is a recent interview he gave where he has a beard, and he says, "This was an experiment. I decided to see whether I could grow a beard. I look like a socialist. I hate it. It's coming off at the weekend." And the other one is I was watching some older Top Gear episodes, and the one of the things he says is do you have this kind of car? And he goes, yes. He goes, see, criminal, and it's like it's a young black chap, and the intake of breath from the entirety of the audience, where Clarkson goes, it is simply a fact. Anyone under 25 is a criminal, but it's the fact that it was just this young black guy, and everyone thought that instantly that he was referring to the chap's ethnicity. It was very, very clear from the reaction that it was just a very interesting response. It's just another gaffe. But can you imagine that sort of thing being acceptable on even a daytime or morning program nowadays? Just not going to happen, is it? So
everything's been cleansed. That basically we don't have any comedy. We don't have everything has gone. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with this. I don't know whether this is still the case. I know that not too many years back it was still the case, that they had a compliance department at the BBC. And
right.
If in any way you intended to make a joke, so this is not some, obviously you can't fax in the ad libs that you might make, but if there was anything that was planned, you were expected to submit it to the compliance department.
Yeah, to ensure that it didn't offend the wrong people.
If can you think of anything more Orwellian? I mean, if Orwell had known about the existence of such a thing, he clearly would have included something like that in 1984. The compliance department.
You have 10 seconds to comply.
The fact that they actually have a statue of Orwell at the entrance of the BBC headquarters, and they have got a compliance department, and you just go, does anybody spot the irony here?
Yes. Well, there are many things. I can't remember exactly what is written above the entrance to the BBC or the old BBC building, but it was something to do with impartiality, and of course they're in no way impartial anymore. So, speaking of Andrew Neil, just going back a little bit, what do you make of this GB News thing? This venture of his?
I spoke about it on the week that was.
Go on.
I kind of said, in America, I think the way things developed was different. because the BBC has been making a lot of noises about GB News and how this would be a bad thing and how this would be a polarizing thing and so on. Whereas I don't think. I mean, I believe, yes, it more than likely will only yet further polarize things because it's, broadcast media is so much more powerful than print media. But when it comes to where does responsibility for this lie, it lies with the existing broadcasters. And the one thing that I remember in this context is it Jon Snow? Who was when there was this Brexit demonstration?
Yes, and he said he'd never seen a more white.
I've never seen more white people in one place than here, or whatever.
Yes.
And once you have the mainstream broadcasters talking like that, there is no way you can actually claim that they are still occupying the centre.
He should have been fired on the spot for that.
There is no way you can say they're occupying the centre. Now, what of the people who are right-leaning? As long as the broadcast media is somewhere in the centre, as long as it kind of tries to represent both sides, then fine. You may get a piece where some on one side complain and another piece where people on the other side complain. But when it is just lodged on one side, and one clip on Twitter after the other of feminist activists and trans activists, and you're just looking at it going, I'm sorry, but am I dreaming here? How does anybody putting this stuff out at the BBC think that this is unbiased and that this is not just constantly pushing one agenda? And therefore, the goal is wide open on the right-hand side, because once the mainstream media has settled on the left, then it's pretty obvious that on the right, someone will kind of demand to be represented in the same way. And it would be simple for the mainstream media to close that if the BBC would just basically send out a message to its staff: we're no longer doing this left-wing stuff. We're going back to what we once did, and we're reporting from the centre. Then they would, in a way, deny that space. But they're refusing to budge. Well, no. We won't placate the fascists. We will stay here at the centre with the SJW people,
with the gender communists,
with pink hair, And you just go, this is insane. So they would rather allow the space for a competitor to come in, rather than actually give up their own bias.
I see the trouble with this as well, though, is that I look at Andrew Neil and I see a big C Conservative, as in party member, more than a small C Conservative, and I see someone who is effectively going to run controlled opposition in exactly the same way that I think that Lawrence Fox is controlled opposition for his London mayor bid.
I'm not so sure about this controlled opposition stuff. I'm not sure that I would see Andrew Neil as a party man. I could well imagine that he winces when he hears. There was that when we had this whole thing with the feminists kicking off, and the 6 p.m. curfew and whatever. What's she called? Caroline Noakes, isn't it? She appeared and was sort of saying, "Oh yes, misogyny should be a hate crime." And she is the chair of the Women's Inequalities Committee in Parliament, and she is a Conservative. Now, you cannot tell me that Andrew Neil is a total party man and says, "Right on, sister, yes." No, I think he will still go, "Oh, good God, no."
No, but then I don't think that the Tory party is behind that particular motion either. As a party, even if it's been proposed from within.
We've heard various Tories make, very social justicey noises.
Absolutely, because the Tories are a left-wing party.
Of the party, I don't think they're necessarily wedded to that. But I think that's where the difference, the difference lies between the grassroots of the party that are, in a way, yes, they're in the party, but they're also small C Conservatives. as opposed to just the party apparatus. And I don't necessarily think that Andrew Neil is entirely wedded to the party apparatus so much as that he's where more than likely the grassroots are, which is small c conservative.
He has let down the side several times with regards to social justice issues, which we noted in the wake of him leaving his initial job as what was it? Oh, for goodness sake! What was it? Question Time and another segment that he ran, and I can't remember the exact issue it was, but he completely cucked. This week, yeah. But he completely cucked on an issue which we completely did not expect him to, and it was very surprising. He became out pro censorship or something on
well,
a particular issue.
I don't know what the example would be, but I do know I've seen various things that he's done when he was with the BBC, and I think one of the things he does very much is not in that regard, I would say it's not so much his being a party man. I think it would be much more that he's sort of the corporate guy. So if he works for the BBC, he will defend the BBC tooth and nail, because I've seen him do that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I kind of wonder, look, Andrew, do you really think this?
Mm-hmm.
And I could well imagine, when he will have been with the Sunday Times and was it the Spectator? I'm not sure. He's had various jobs.
Yeah.
He will have been the corporate chap who just basically bats for that particular side. And I think in that regard, that's more than likely the sort of thing you're referring to.
I see. I mean, I disagree, but it is good to get another perspective on it. Certainly. Sorry.
I remember he once had the chap on from Russia Today, and I think it was the CEO of Russia Today or whatever, and obviously it got quite feisty.
Indeed.
He was asking the Russia Today chap quite searching questions about lack of bias. He can be quite good. He can be quite good. I remember him. He was very good on Blair. And the Russia Today chap. I mean, we all know Russia Today will have certain no-go areas because it's clearly backed by the Russian government.
Yes.
So the Russia Today chap then obviously responded asking Andrew Neil a few pointed questions, as in, said, well, you say this about us. What about you?
Yes. Yes.
And that's when you kind of saw Andrew Neil really, really hold a corporate line. Whereas you felt if it were just down to him, he would more than likely go, well, you may have a point. Do you understand what I mean? So, that's why I see him very much as the corporate person who, whatever it is, whatever project he's working on, he will entirely defend it. So I can well imagine that the same attitude will be applied to GB News. GB News can do no wrong. Even though more than likely he'll be writing into his diary, I think we screwed this one up.
I don't know. I find that particular compliance to be somewhat insufferable. But we'll see, I suppose, how it turns out. I agree
with you, yes. I mean, an outbreak of honesty from all people would be a great thing, yes.
But we shall see. I did also briefly mention there Lawrence Fox and his mayoral bid. So he's predicating this primarily on the depoliticization of the police. I do not think he has a rabbit's chance in hell of getting anywhere near the mayoralship. I don't know about you.
No, he hasn't. Barring some disaster, he hasn't got a chance. Yeah. But what it will do is it will more than likely give him a bit of a platform here or there in order to be interviewed as the mayoral candidate.
Well, which is
and that's more than likely the way he's thinking, because hasn't he started a new political party?
Yeah, the Reclaim Party or something.
Yeah, and that new political party, as one could have predicted, is not really going anywhere and is dead in the water, isn't it?
Well,
so one is desperately looking for some sort of relevance, some sort of platform whereby one can still engage with the public, and that's what I think this is.
He's a curious one because, of course, he made his money in acting. He then had his blow up on Question Time, which will have completely tanked any chances he ever gets of getting a role again in the industry. Then he released an album about freedom of speech, which I found to be incredibly cringe. And then, he came on This Morning, for instance, and sang one of the songs, and he did Trigonometry, I think, and several others. And then, of course, he disappeared for a while. Then he set up the Reclaim Party, and he was one of those things where you end up following him on Twitter because you recognise he's on side, and then you realise that, oh no, this one's quite insane, too big for his.
Well, he courts controversy because the edginess keeps him in the, in the spotlight.
I don't think so. I don't think it's about him seeking. I think he is ideologically possessed. He can see the problem that we all do, but he's just wealthy enough and quote just influential enough, which I think he's overestimating, to make a difference, to be the person that the public rallies behind. But I think he's a bit of a charisma vacuum. He comes off on Twitter as the same as any shitposty dunker, right? Someone who basically just dunks for easy victories on wokeism, and then and doesn't really go anywhere. He has not as much clout as he thinks. He is running for mayor, but I mean he doesn't have the money to finance a campaign of that size, even despite his personal wealth. I mean, he claims he's doing it all for his children, but how true that is, again, I don't know.
Which prime minister was it had said, "Events, dear boy, events"? In that regard, sort of political fortunes can change. What you need to do is basically keep yourself in the shop window, and I think that's what he's trying to do.
Possibly.
And take Joe Biden. Joe Biden is now president.
The great sniffer himself, yes.
When he got the candidacy, I didn't think there was a sort of a cat in hell's chance that he would win. But then came COVID, and then came the sort of remarkable economic drop and whatever, and suddenly he was in the race. He was in the running. And
yes,
in all fairness, I think if one really would have thought at the time that there was a realistic chance of the Democrats winning the presidency, I think they would have got a different candidate. I think quite a lot more candidates who maybe be of a somewhat higher quality would have put their names forward, but instead they kind of kept out of the race, thinking, well, we'll keep our powder dry, and until in 4 years' time we can run. Because we don't want to run against the president who's sitting on the most powerful economy in history, and there's nothing. There's no chance we can beat him anyway.
I have two issues with this comparison. The first is that Joe Biden was a career politician and therefore at least suited to being selected for candidacy, whereas Lawrence Fox is completely independent. And does have no background in politics. And the second is that the Democrats rigged the last election and he didn't actually win. So that's my issue.
Well, I don't agree with you on that last part. But when it comes to Fox, I would just say yes. I think his chances of ever getting anywhere are very, very slim. But when you look at someone like Farage for a long time was seen as a complete joke, and he did not come from politics.
Yeah.
He came from finance. And he was the butt of jokes constantly. I mean, they brought him on to Have I Got News for You once in a while, and he clearly was kind of the fall guy. But yes, he just stuck to his guns and survived it until he kind of just by the merit of always having been around became a bit of a political institution. So it is doable, but it's very, very unlikely.
All right, so I'll give Lawrence 20 years, and we'll see how he is at this point.
Yes.
I mean, you know,
pretty much. Yes. Yeah. Who knows? Yeah. Perhaps he will turn out to be the Nigel Farage of woke. But he has to rail against it for 25 years until eventually he gets somewhere.
I will point out I have nothing against, bless him, Lawrence Fox. I think he's completely genuine. I'm just trying to be realistic about his chances and that sort of thing. All right, so I am going to I'm going to pop on a couple of super chats here, just as a nice interim, and we'll see where the topics take us. Mr. Will Guitar, referring to The Shining, says, I tried to watch the follow-up of The Shining, Doctor Sleep. Did they turn that into a film? I know it was a book, because my brother had been reading it, but I didn't know they'd dramatised it. But okay, I tried to watch the follow-up of The Shining, Doctor Sleep, and felt I had been conned twice into watching drivel. Never shall I be fooled again. Thank you, Mr. Will Guitar. So there's one on our side there, Bridger, for that one. And the Civic Nationalist says, I do find it ridiculous that the people I am defending are the same people I find myself protecting others against, because I have standards. Freedom for all, and I'll die for it. God save EIIR. There's the Irish Republic. So, yes, thank you, Sim.
EIIR?
Yes.
I don't think that's the Irish Republic.
Sorry, sorry, that's Queen Elizabeth, isn't it?
Yes.
How on earth did I? Good grief!
Look, I think we've just had our moment.
In
the Thin Blue Line. Have you ever seen that?
Look. Yes, I've seen the Thin Blue Line. Look, in fairness, the EIR is Ireland, Irish Republic. So EIIR, it's close. It's close.
But yes, in the Thin Blue Line, they have that gag, don't they? The has arrived.
Yes.
The what? The yeah.
Yes, the ER. So, thank you very much, Civic Nationalist, and thanks for the £10. Yes, he's referring, of course, to the protests which are going on at the moment, which are to do with this thing. I find this all very suspect, I must say. The police response to the women's vigil, as it were, for Sarah Everard, and also the bizarre media responses, sanitising which protests are allowed and where. I do not like the fact that the young lady the red-headed young lady who is being plastered over media everywhere appears to be a crisis actor. And they had, some very photogenic shots of her being arrested, mask and sans mask, photoshopped mask, etc., and with almost studio lighting as well. I think that this is all very suspect in terms of that.
It's almost as if someone had sort of, prepared a lighting setup before.
Yeah, it's horrendous. Apparently, if there's audio of the clip, and the photographer is asking the police to hold her in a particular way and stuff like that. So it's very, very strange. And of course, she is an out-of-work actress herself, who is now raking it in from all her media appearances.
Did you hear of the indecent exposure?
Indecent exposure?
This has been all over the BBC. So basically, they've interviewed this woman live on air. They've had shots of her interviewed at another location, and so on. So there was a young woman present at that particular vigil, and the police obviously were there manhandling women. It was terrible. The oppression by the patriarchy, even though there were a lot of female police officers there too, I noticed, but they never get mentioned. Mm-hmm. But apparently then a man exposed himself to this young woman. And she then went to some police officers.
Oh, yeah. Oh yes, I see it here. Sorry, excuse the hiccups.
And they didn't want to investigate it. They said they'd had enough of all these feminists and got back in their police van.
They had enough with the rioters tonight.
And they wouldn't help. And what for a disgrace. And of course, given what happened to Piers Morgan, who disbelieved a woman on television, I will, of course, believe every single word of this. I believe that in the middle of an angry mob of feminist activists, a man suddenly got his todger out.
Yes,
because I mean that's.
I hear he was even
that's a normal thing to do, right? I mean, it wouldn't be that he would be possibly afraid of his life if he did something.
I mean, he offered them the scissors himself. You know. So go on, have a go if you think you're hard enough.
I completely, totally believe this story because #MeToo. And
this is of course
what is so funny. This comes in conjunction with there being reports about their what do they call it? A judicial inquiry, I think it was.
Okay.
Whereby there was some sort of attempt by various women's organisations to go after the Crown Prosecution Service due to them not prosecuting sufficient rapes and sexual assault allegations and whatever.
Okay.
And I just find it funny that this comes hand in hand on the same day, in which there is such a utterly believable accusation by a young woman of, in the middle of a sort of, feminist brouhaha, a man supposedly exposing himself and the police going, yeah, right, pull the other one.
So here's another bit of more granular stuff. Apparently the police have been dealing with frivolous statements pretty much all evening. They've been shouted at by a large number of what appear to be BLM activists screaming ACAB and police are racist and Churchill's a racist because they were also defending the Churchill statue from being vandalised that evening. The crisis actor actually, who claims that she had been doing nothing wrong and socially distancing herself.
But we don't know she was a crisis actor.
No. Okay. The young lady who is an out of work actor, and take from that what you will, was screaming point blank and spitting in the face of a police officer before she was taken down. Additionally, just aside from the lack of decorum going on, although there were some peaceful protesters, let's be realistic about this, had been told that because we are in a COVID lockdown situation, protest was not going to be available. So, and that they would have to disperse. Now, as someone who is anti-lockdown and anti-protest, pro-protest, anti-lockdown and pro-protest, of course I'm galled by the fact that a protest was called off due to this. I can also understand that the police felt that they were put in a position where they could not, they had to enforce the guidance they'd been given. Equally, they shut down anti-lockdown protests before in the same way. So there's some consistency there, even if we disagree with that consistency. So the fact that all of a sudden, suddenly every single feminist appears to have become a libertarian and suddenly supports the right to protest above and beyond, even though that kind of hypocrisy, given that they were so anti the lockdown protests simply a month ago, is staggering. And the other thing,
I think the thing to look at there is people like Keir Starmer, and I think there's some Lib Dem also complaining. About these poor women being manhandled and the right to protest, and they were grieving. I always find it so funny when we're told they were grieving because they didn't know the woman. But what is so remarkable is Keir Starmer has basically in Parliament at every Prime Minister's question time effectively been telling Boris Johnson he's not doing enough regarding COVID-19 lockdown. But then the first opportunity... Oh, well, no, the police should not have intervened with these people who are clearly breaking the lockdown.
Yeah.
And you just look at it and you go, okay, look, this is not a question of whether you're in support of lockdown or not. And I really think that people need to divorce these two issues, because in quite a few cases we've got people who who seem to be actually completely opposed to the cause, but they're so against lockdown that they're nonetheless, supporting these mad bints. and you just look at it, you just go, no, I'm sorry, but it's a question of just applying the principle equally. And when people sort of say, oh, well, they let the BLM thing go ahead, yes, and that was a mistake. And I think by now they've kind of admitted that this was a mistake, if you know what I mean.
Didn't do anything
we can only operate from the position which we're in. And therefore, when you then suddenly, in the middle of a lockdown, get this, and you've then got all these mad feminists. I mean, and there was a great many, and we're told, oh no, we were socially distancing. Well, not on the pictures I saw. And
no,
you look at, and also you may have noticed when you see some of the police scuffling, and particularly that redhead that was wrestled to the floor and whatever.
Yes,
it's boarded. So she's not being wrestled to the floor on grass or gravel or anything like that. It's boarded, and if you look on the photos, you can see the red columns.
Right.
So you've got a vigil, and you've got these thousands of women gathered around the bandstand.
Yes.
So tell me, who are the people who are in the bandstand?
The police, because they said no one could go on the bandstand to talk.
Well, yes, but it appears to be those people who were arrested were the people in the bandstand.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. One of the things...
If you would have a feminist demonstration with thousands of them crowding around what you could effectively call a stage, who would be people who would be on the stage?
Yes.
Would this be the innocent bystanders who just happen to take part and hold a candle?
Pretty
or would those actually be the ringleaders who were more than likely either holding speeches or getting the crowd to do chants?
Pretty sure. Irrespective of that, right? And I do agree with you. Irrespective of that, the other thing is that they're claiming that they were dealt with, very violently. They were jostled by the police, they were thrown down, they were abused, and they were harmed. And it's been going around certain more edgy circles. Is the clip of a protest from the same day, I think in the Netherlands, and of course they've completely shut down at the moment, and the police are literally hammering people in the street. I mean, like butts of rifles to face kind of violence, and they are putting down their protests in this particular way. And for someone to say because they were roughed up a little bit by having their arms put behind their back, or perhaps being put on the floor,
not so obvious. I have seen Keira Knightley knock out men, 7-foot-tall, giant, muscly pirates. I think these women can take it.
Oh, of course they can. Yes, they're just strong, independent women, after all. But so it's just the people who did it. Then there's the other thing is Kate Middleton. So of course Kate turned up and laid,
she turned up.
She laid some flowers earlier in the day. During the outside period, when it was legal, as much as we disagree with the fact that it became illegal at some point later on, but legal, it turned up, laid some flowers. People were saying, oh, this was clearly a publicity stunt because she wasn't wearing a mask, even though she snuck out in secret to do it, had no entourage. The photos which have surfaced have come from a bystander who recognised her at the scene, and she's done up in a big coat so that she can cover herself up. Now, whether or not
I'm a bit doubtful of that that version of events, to be honest.
Whether or not it is a publicity stunt or not, she turns up, and of course the feminist crowd have gone absolutely mental and said as soon as she left, the police were then called in, and they wouldn't have come in if she was there, and that sort of thing.
They waited until she left.
Whereas it's like, no, they waited until the evening when the actual vigil was going on, when the actual protest was going on, when they had said, you can go around in the day, but you can't do it at night, and the court ordered them to break it up.
That there was because there was a lockdown, they requested an exemption from lockdown in order to hold the vigil. And I think that went on at the High Court. And they didn't win it. Now, they will sort of say, oh, we ran out of time, this, that, whatever, But no, I mean, you didn't get the exemption. So you actually were at court.
Yeah.
So effectively, there is a court finding against this. That's why I think the police were very much left in a sticky situation, because otherwise they may well have treated it the BLM way. But given that there was actually a court procedure about this very thing, and they were told they couldn't do this, that put the police very much on the spot. And I think in a lot of the media reporting on this, that is being forgotten. So when there's a specific court finding, really, against a particular event taking place, what choice does the police have?
Yeah, I mean, my sister's a police officer, so she knows that she just follows orders. Basically, that's the way you have to do it. I mean, it's that or resign, right? There's no other option, right? Okay, let's move on from Sarah Everard's or the response therein. If you're
when it comes to Everard, whenever I hear that name, I'm always reminded of Jeeves and Wooster.
Go on.
Because there is an episode where there is a terrible painting in a mansion, and Jeeves is once again being strong-armed by one of his aunts. He has a plethora of aunts who always want him to do terrible deeds.
It doesn't help that the aunts are often the same aunt but played by a different actress.
Yes, but there is this hideous painting in this particular manor.
Yes.
And he is to steal it. But both, I think, the father and the son are painters.
Okay.
But one of them is a very good painter, and the other one, painted a rather lousy painting that is still hanging in this particular place. Yes. And he is to steal it so that finally this eyesore goes away.
Right.
The problem is, I don't remember what their surnames were anymore, but one of them is Edward, and the other one is Everard.
Oh, God. Okay.
So I will let you guess whether he actually gets the right painting and burns that.
I don't remember this particular episode. It's not been too long
so there's Edward and Everard. And because, when you look at the signature, when you look at an artist's signature on a painting, it's very, very often a bit squiggly. So you could easily confuse Edward and Everard.
Dear.
So rather than getting rid of the eyesore, he actually cuts one of the good paintings out of the frame.
Oh dear. Well, let's pass on this now. Rest in peace, Sarah Everard. If you're interested in any of that, I have done any deeper breakdowns into that. I have done a video on the topic. If you haven't already seen it, definitely recommend. Okay, EC90 says there is also the fact that Clarkson punched a man. So I assume this is referring to him, not being.
Was his departure from the BBC? Yes, he punched somebody. Yes,
he did. He punched his producer. I'm trying to remember. Oisin or something was the name of the chap who he punched, because he didn't get a steak dinner on one night of filming. So yeah,
well, yes, I still think it was a matter of he didn't get a meal, so he lost his rag a bit, and somehow so the idea that I'm sorry, there's no steak dinner tonight, punch. I don't think that's necessarily
but yes, the Clarkson fracas, as they called it, yes. But no, he should have been fired for that, and he was.
What? So. You haven't taken the blue M&Ms out of the bowl as I instructed you to? Punch.
Did you? Anakin Cringewalker says, "Oh boy, forcing all working-age men to stay inside and abode their anger over the internet, developing a unified grievance. What could possibly go wrong?"
I mean, there's a very simple answer to many things in that regard. So the way we solve child abuse is all adults have to be under curfew so that children can go out and play in safety. I mean, it makes perfect sense. It's the same logic.
I'm just imagining we get to a point with some kind of bizarre dystopian future where women have been radicalized to believe that men are, like, the brutish, oafish sort of evil of the world. And so men are allowed out during the daytime hours, but in order to preserve women's freedom, women can go out in the night time. Women can also go out during the daytime, but none of them choose to, except to occasionally stock up on vitamin D, because they've reclaimed the night, right? They've reclaimed the night, and they couldn't possibly deal with these oafish. And all female hit squads move around at night, summarily executing any man found out after dusk. Who... And
eventually, because this goes on for so long, the two sexes actually evolve apart.
Yes.
They actually become almost like separate species.
Yeah, indeed. And all breeding is done exclusively through the use of a mixture of sperm banks and fertility donors. So there you go.
What are they in the time machine? There's the Eloi, and what are the others that live underground?
It's been so long since I watched the Time Machine. The Eloi and for goodness sake, Morlocks.
Yes, that's
right?
The Morlocks. So yes. So the males, kind of because they're so deprived of sunlight and whatever, slowly start evolving into the Morlock.
Yes, of course. Whereas the women live their banal... although maybe it would go the other way around if women are only coming out at night. I don't know. But basically, I can see that this dystopian future coming to pass, all because of the work of Mark Drakeford in Wales. Drakeford will be his name cursed throughout the ages.
Drakeford the Great, as he shall go down in history.
Yes. Cursed by those who knew him and venerated by those who did not.
Drakeford Square, which will be the new name of Trafalgar Square. And of course, Nelson is going to be removed from the column, and instead Mark Drakeford's likeness is going to be placed atop it. And then gilded, so that the sun beams off it during the daylight hours.
Or whatever woke activist replaces him, that sort of thing. Like the man who ushered in the new age, who knew. I'm being told off because I watched The Time Machine instead of reading it, but I don't know. I
haven't read The Time Machine. I've watched The Time Machine. It's a good film.
I didn't even know it was based on a book, so there you go. But I remember the machine itself, which is a grand old thing, I must say. The year is 2022, says Bernsey.
I think that was the tweet of mine that Jordan Peterson liked. There was some sort of gag that went on about his having some sort of device or whatever. So I sent him. I just answered it with a picture of the time machine from that film, and he liked it. So I have had a tweet liked by Jordan Peterson. I will have you know.
Your claim to 15 minutes of fame there.
15 seconds more like it was Twitter.
Bernsey saying the year is 2022. Men must be shackled and placed in chastity, only released by court order for a limited time per day. Yes, absolutely. What happens when?
No, go ahead.
What happens when everyone identifies as female at night?
Well, there is that.
Well,
yes.
Of course, if the feminists can win this particular argument, then of course the trans rights lobby goes out the window, because all the M2Fs or MTFs basically get their own prisons and that sort of thing.
Human version of MDF.
Yeah.
No, when it comes to this whole thing, these things always break down. You know how you get this talk of, oh well, women are oppressed and whatever, but however few rights women may have had historically, sooner or later this resolves itself due to the fact that women are not just some abstract thing. Women are mothers and sisters and daughters. So in the end, they are related to the men who have a say over these things. In the same way, when women then start bedeviling men, as in, oh, well, it's all terrible, it's this and that, well, sooner or later it applies to their fathers and their brothers and their sons.
There shall be no more relationships. There shall be only dildos and fertility clinics. Britisher. There shall be only dildos and fertility clinics, all children will be raised by the collective. Male children.
Is this how we segue into Cardi B?
Oh God. Male children shall be separated at birth and cast into the darkness. I mean, the light of the day. Whereas women
I just mean because you went into
I know.
territory, and I thought, given that Cardi B has just made the news, is this how we segue into Cardi B?
I don't want to do anything
Cardi B.
No. I don't mind talking about Cardi B. I don't want to do anything in Cardi B. I'm just putting it out there. I don't want to segue into her or any other way into her. That's the way it is.
But sort of theme specifically.
Well, this is because it was the Grammys, right? Isn't it?
Yes, she had a bit of an appearance at the Grammys, didn't she?
What did I do? I said something about this because you tweeted something out about it, saying it's not about it being degenerate. It's about what an absolute state of a woman or something.
Oh no, I think it was a little more polite about that. I said that the Conservatives, they will obviously focus in on this isn't family friendly, whereas the thing I would like to focus in on is the delusional state of this. I mean, this is the Grammys, so this is sort of top tier of show business. So if you set yourself up as some sort of sex doll, a sex bomb, a sort of an idol, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Then you better be a 10 out of 10. This is This is the Grammys. This is global showbiz royalty. And do we really believe that is what we're looking at?
I think I said something along the lines of, yes, sagging plastic, exactly what one wants to be rewarded in music.
Well, it just, to me, this is kind of part of this delusional phenomenon which we're getting with beauty. I mean, many will have more than likely seen the Calvin Klein posters, sort of 2010 or so, and then about 2020.
Yes,
and
of course. And
in
Vogue
2020, it's a hot blonde in a red bikini, and then 2020, it's some kind of
an obese, tattooed,
trans creature,
Yes.
And you're looking at it going, really? This is what we've degenerated into,
it's Harry.
This isn't even me using the word degenerate.
It's Harry. It's Harry Styles in a dress. Yes, it's that sort of thing.
But that's why I find it so strange, because I think beauty matters, and what society regards as beauty does matter, and we know people like Owain and whatever like to go on about architecture, don't they, and beauty, and I hope I've got the right person.
Yes. Yes, he runs the Foundations podcast.
These things are important. This isn't just sort of flippant talk about, and when you then get someone like Cardi B presented to you as, this is the, Marilyn Monroe of 2021, and you're looking at it going,
no.
Excuse me, I really don't see it.
I think I just threw up in my mouth.
This isn't to say. I mean, as I say, I mentioned this when someone commented. I said, look, she may well turn a head or two at the office party if she's wearing something fairly provocative. So this is not to say, oh, this is a horrible, ugly woman.
No.
What I'm simply saying is, this is someone who's, I don't know, a regular car surrounded by Formula One cars.
She's a Ford Mondeo.
And this is supposed to be the fastest car on the track, if you know what I mean. And you think, I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. This is delusional. And somehow we've ended up in this situation where saying that is somehow edgy, whereas it isn't. It's just, I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. Why is everybody watching this and not laughing?
Yeah. A fat stripper on a pole is... I mean, she's not even fat. She's just not phenomenal. It's just the first...
I say this is not me kind of trying to deride some woman as ugly or whatever. It really is just a matter of this is the absolute top echelon in show business. And we're getting presented with this as the sort of superlative example of desirability.
I mean,
and is there really nobody else that looks at it and goes, no, I'm sorry?
Oddly enough.
I mean, if Halle Berry would have been doing this at her absolute prime, I mean, there would have been people losing consciousness all around the planet. But this is what I mean. This is not, and this isn't a question of. Rubber sort of said to me, that it's a matter of taste. And I said, well, yes, taste. Tastes differ, but there is still such a thing as a kind of scale of beauty. You can't just say all beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That sort of ends up in complete relativism. And we do.
There are trends.
Some women are absolutely stunning.
There are
and
trends.
I also agree that there is a difference between sexual desirability and just pure beauty.
I mean,
So when people look at someone like Grace Kelly in films, they see a stunningly beautiful woman, but it's not the same thing as kind of sexual desire that you feel. Do you understand what I mean?
I mean, we also we recognise, for instance, Britisher, that there's a difference between what someone in Outer Mongolia considers to be an objective beauty standard to here, and this is used as kind of thing. It's like there's that island where everyone is obese, and therefore obese is seen as beautiful. And it's this obscure place over there, and I'm just going, yeah, but their life expectancy is 40. But the I was talking about this with a friend as well. Like, this kind of performance as well is they're trying to take something which would there be an as close as we can get to an objective beauty standard in our culture. The Marilyn Monroe, if to give your example, is standing there on stage and doing this. This is something which is designed to titillate the male gaze and to delight women and also to show. Not just virility, fertility, and beauty, but also just desirability in general. This has changed now because this kind of performance is not actually for they've basically cut out everything to do with the male gaze there. They've removed any sense of the objective from the performance, and it is entirely for women. And this is also, like, I have a friend who I won't name, who says, I had a dream. I met a fat black woman around our age, and she had this dress on, and someone told her she was too fat to wear it. And I was about to tell her, I disagree. I find it inspiring, because if she can be confident in wearing things, then I totally can. And I thought, I shouldn't say that. But you look at it and you just go, this is how women think. There's a lot of solidarity between women, and there are a lot more collective and solidarity than there is between men. And this kind of performance is one where the more hate she gets, the more women and feminists in particular will rally to her cause, will rally to her side, and that's what they're betting on, because that controversy not only boosts the image, but ideologically speaking, they're on the quote-unquote right side of history, because the women who want to empower all women to know that they are all beautiful in their own way are the people that they're siding with, and whereas they would see your perspective, Britisher, as being, well, you're just a horny pervert man, aren't you?
A patriarchal, oppressive, horny pervert.
Yes.
No, I think that was actually very well worded. I do understand where you're coming from. I do believe that is more than likely, to a large extent, how this is being explained. But in the end, you are still looking at the emperor with no clothes, because
absolutely.
you are looking at this supposedly terribly sexy performance.
Well, it doesn't help.
And you're sort of telling yourself, I'm sorry, but this is just it just isn't what it's being sold to be.
Well, it doesn't get around the fact that when it comes to sexual attraction, men define what is attractive in women in exactly the same way that women define what is attractive in men. Because men will conform to what women want them to be attracted to in order to get it, and vice versa.
Have you seen the video in question? WAP. Have you seen that video?
No, well, unfortunately not. Unfortunately, yes. And I've also seen the version with Ben Shapiro's face photoshopped.
Yes, of course. But did you notice something in the video that basically scuppered all their contorting? There is, I don't know what her name is. There was one of the young Kardashian girls.
Okay.
In the video.
Right.
And at one point, she just walks down a corridor in slow motion. And say what you want, that is a very attractive woman. And the funny thing is that for all the hyper-sexualized contorting and effort that the two black rappers, of which Cardi B is one, are putting in, they get completely blown out of the water by an attractive woman who does nothing else but walk down a corridor.
Yeah, life isn't fair, is it?
and you look at this and you just go, hang on a moment, can she actually spread her legs any further? Can she hump this thing more vigorously? And yet here comes this very good-looking young girl and walks down a corridor and just, wins the competition without even trying. And that is where the sort of the gap between the message and reality just becomes plain. That the ones who are supposedly being the sexually desirable ones are the ones that are putting in all the effort, but they've simply lost touch with reality because they're not that attractive. And then when the super sex bomb arrives and doesn't even try, she garners all the attention.
I think it's certainly true that women have a cap, effectively. There is only so far that they can rise. Their peak desirability is based primarily around their appearance, and if you are not a particularly attractive woman, you have to balance your personality out you have to balance out your value in other ways, which is just something which a lot of women are not prepared to do. They want to consider themselves to be the top of the hierarchy, even when it's the top of the visual hierarchy, when it's just plainly not true.
Yes, but to me, this is the equivalent of having someone like you or I on the football pitch in the Premier League. And it's blatantly obvious that we can't keep up with the others. And yet the commentary is that we are the most dangerous players on the pitch.
We're the bravest, We're the most stunning.
Any moment now, the ball could be passed to one of us. And, we would score almost automatically. It's just a matter of time. And you just go, well, no, this is ridiculous. And that, to me, was sort of, where I was pretty open-mouthed when I saw some of this performance. I just went, really? This is like me standing on a stage between bodybuilders with my sort of Mr. Bean body, trying to flex while I'm standing between these oiled muscle mounds. It's just ridiculous. You're in top showbiz territory here, where the most talented and the most beautiful are, and you're putting on this performance as though you're just sex on legs, and one just has to look at you and just go, I'm sorry, but you've got the wrong address, love.
I don't know. I just find the whole thing disgusting anyway. I find it crass. I think it's insincere. I think it's trying to be funny. But the worst thing is, of course, I've met people who think that it's, this song is like God's gift to music. And I'm just flabbergasted by the popularity of such a thing.
This kind of shows the power of promotion. Because you have to consider that new music today really is doomed. Because it has to compete with the entire back catalogue of a century that is always readily available online. You are up against the best of the last 120 years. And yet, how many people have heard much of that music? So, they basically get to choose between that which they're exposed to, which is largely the heavily promoted present output.
Yeah.
So instead, they're listening to Cardi B, whereas in fact, they could be listening to Ella Fitzgerald. They just more than likely don't know she ever existed.
It's not even that. Like, I have a friend.
It's a bit like you with films, isn't it?
Oh, I don't even know. Like, I have a friend. He adores, like, just drill rap and mumble rap and Cardi B's crap, and I just don't get it. I do not see, and it's all the rage in the clubs. It seems to be a phase that the whole world's going through, and like, I feel like an old man because I'm just going, what is the world coming to? I mean, I don't have a particularly defined musical genre that I'm particularly attached to, but I mean, we've had some conversations in the past over the time we've known each other. Pretty sure we both enjoyed some blues and jazz and B.B. King and all that stuff. I've enjoyed some classic rock. I've enjoyed folk music from the English, Irish, and Scottish traditions.
Your deep love for Russian folk songs.
Not to mention my love of Russian folk songs, obviously. I've listened to that. I've listened to metal. I've listened to all sorts of stuff, but I cannot even comprehend. But it's interesting what you say, given that, yes, about the accessibility of such things. I think people will always love music, but I don't think it will be a great unifier in the way in which it might have been before.
Due to the internet, we now inhabit the greatest record collection in the world. Indeed. And the greatest library on earth. And yet nobody is reading any books and no one is listening to any music.
No, I have in my pocket a device capable of accessing the entire sum of human knowledge up until this point, and I use it to look at pictures of cats and get in arguments with people. I don't know who coined that, but I think that's a pretty good estimation. Right, let's crack on with some of the super chats because we're drawing to the end here now. Neil Morgan, the chap who sent in the incisive question earlier, said, "Thank you for your advice, fellas. I can't wait for the Forever Wars stream. Any chance of getting the pastor on so he and Scrump can trade gamer words?" I will try and get. I could obviously talk to Scrump anytime. I don't know Louis Laval personally, and I'm pretty sure he is unaware of my existence. But I can certainly get Scrump to the table. Speaking of which, I'll probably get Scrump on this channel at some point. He's mentioned he's quite keen in a kind of tit for tat thing. I shall go on his stream. He shall come on mine, and we can have some fun with that. Britisher will love him, I'm sure. But there we go, no problem. Anakin Cringewalker says, "Much like a man who told himself his £300 wife was pretty for 40 years, only to have his crisis, divorced, and tripped off to Vietnam, modern man will break." I think when you are living a lie for such a long period of time, only the extraordinarily weak-willed will not break. Shall we say, because they'll just completely capitulate to everything. So yes, Anakin Cringewalker, I think that's accurate. And finally, Mr. Gently Benevolent says, "Cardi B is so unpleasant. She causes one's todger to go concave. Watch too much out of her, and it will start growing out of your behind in retreat." I think that's a very horrific.
I really think that people are being a bit too unkind. As I say, I think, as I say, I'm not saying the lady is unattractive. That's not it.
I think she is unattractive.
My point is if you are doing that at a venue like that, you better be Raquel Welch in her prime.
I would be kinder to Cardi B if her bottom was not filled with silicone, if her breasts were not filled with silicone, if her hips had not been extended, if she hadn't had a Brazilian butt lift, and if her face had not been injected with a lot of Botox.
None of which we know.
She's more chemical than vegetable. That's all I'm saying. These are things that I've inferred. I've done no research. Take it as you will. So it's just things that I am seeing since the trend. I think South Park does its best when it shows these women, and they're just wobbling along. But yes, they have somehow managed to taken grotesquerie and claimed that it is beautiful, and I disagree. Not that she might have been beautiful beforehand, but with all this addition, I disagree. I think it's like, yeah, she's a sex doll now and nothing more, and she never will be more, and she will be forgotten by history. So there you go. Hopefully, anyway. As we all will. All right. Well, we've been going for 2 hours now. It is 10:30. As is customary, this is our time to end. Do you have anything to shill, Britisher? Are you working on anything interesting?
I didn't have anything to shill, although I would like to just brag a bit, because I have just defeated YouTube. There was this video that kind of sparked off due to sea shanties going viral. And due to that, video of mine did rather well, and people were kind of brought into my channel and started looking around, and they discovered a new video, which then also went, well, yes, somewhat spectacularly successful compared to, previous years. So it's remarkable just looking at the chart as I'm looking at it now. It's pretty much a horizontal line, which then just suddenly leaps. And it's just gone past 50,000 views. Always considering this is despite YouTube's best efforts.
Is this Edward Pellew?
It's the Edward Pellew video, yes. So it is now the third most watched video of mine, and it seems to be heading towards second position.
That's good. I'm glad for you there.
So yes, I am fairly chuffed that despite all the machinations of YouTube, one or two things are sneaking through under the radar.
There we go. We can only hold out such hope for your bra video to take off.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's one of those that might just do something like that.
There we are. All right, then. If you're interested in such a thing, Pritchard has an interesting video on Edward to tell you. Thank you ever so much to everyone for watching. Thank you to all the regulars. Thank you to everyone who super chatted, but also to everyone who just turned up. I can see regulars like Lumberg, Loafer Sheffield, Colin P. Smith, and others in there. So it's really lovely to see you all, and we will see you next week, hopefully next Monday, and all will be well. Take care, everybody. Have a fantastic week, and good night.
Toodle pip.